Hey guys, it's Carl with Gray Matters. Got a couple of things to talk about. Actually, already did this show, but apparently there was an audio problem, so I'm going to do this show again. Let me double check and make sure that I'm currently getting audio before I go much farther. So hang on bear with me, folks. Here, that's not what I'm trying to do. Let's see. Hang on. Pardon me again. I apologize. But like I said, I don't want to do another 30 minutes and realize that I'm not broadcasting any audio. So guys, let's talk about Rush Limbaugh. He passed away yesterday, and as to be expected, there was instantly, like within minutes, there was so much hate and callousness and vitriol and just ugliness online, uh, talking about his death, celebrating his death, um, and it's 30 minutes and realize. Okay, so I'm getting audio this time. So that being said, I went to check Twitter like minutes after finding out he had passed away, and I apparently got the news through my little grapevine of people, like minutes after his wife had announced it on air. So minutes after the world knew, I knew. I wasn't listening to the show. I don't even know what show it was on. But I knew within minutes what had happened, and I went and found an article that had been put up very rapidly, and I posted it, and I went to Twitter to check out what people were saying, and it was just so ugly. And I'm going to read some of the tweets from some of the celebrities out there, and it's unfortunate that people are behaving this way. Look, I don't care if you love the guy or hate the guy. We've got to stop talking like this about one another. I mean, the guy died. The guy had some very questionable opinions. He said some probably ugly things over the years, but I don't know a single human being who hasn't said some ugly things over the years. Most of us just don't have radio shows to talk about it. So Amber Tamberlin writes, Rotten Purgatory, Billy Baldwin, Enjoy Hell. Roseanne Arquette, it's a real shame when someone wasted their life spewing hate and lies. What lonely, sad, and empty place it must be at the end. David Cross, Cancer killed the cancer. Mike Drucker, a writer. It's easy to make fun of Rush Limbaugh right now, but it's important to remember that he also brought a lot of joy to a lot of people by dying. Ron Perlman, me being Hellboy and shit and having spent so much time in Hades, I would like to extend my deepest sympathies to the poor devil who will no doubt have to spend the rest of eternity with Rush Limbaugh. I mean, look, like I said, I'm not saying you can't disagree with the guy. I'm not saying you can't even hate the guy. But we have got to stop that way toward one another. I'm not. I look. I've said things similar, perhaps even worse, in my day. But I'm getting older. I'm getting a little wiser, and I'm trying not to spew that kind of anger and ugliness back into the world because I found that it only comes back to haunt you in the long run. So all you I will tell you right now, had it been someone like Don Lemon or any other uh, big name on the left, Obama had passed away or something like that, I know that there would be plenty of people on the Republican side absolutely saying the exact same kinds of ugly things and perhaps even worse uh, about their passing. But that's exactly my point. We've got to stop hating each other because we disagree on how best to run the country. And we've got to stop calling names, especially when we know deep down inside that it's probably not true. But that's the sad part about it is a lot of us have convinced ourselves, not myself necessarily, because I'm trying to rid myself of this kind of behavior. But I've been guilty of it, absolutely. I probably still am from time to time. But we've got assuming that someone on the other side is bad, evil, they're racist, or they're they're lazy or whatever crap we try to spew out. We have got to stop hating each other and saying and talking about each other with such disrespect. We're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to solve any problems. We're just going to get angrier and angrier, and it's eventually going to come to a very ugly boiling point. And we don't want that. So we need to stop it. Republicans, Democrats, everyone, we have to be better people. We absolutely have to be above this sort of behavior. And I'm not calling it out because it's Rush Limbaugh. I was never even really a Rush Limbaugh fan. But I know he meant a lot to people on the right. Hey, look, I had my things that I agreed with Rush on. I think he made a lot of valid points here or there. He said some things that made me laugh. Um, but I also disagreed with him, and I thought he said some very stupid, ugly things. So that's just a fact. But we cannot keep talking about each other in this way. I don't care if you hate Rush Limbaugh. I don't care if you made your life miserable. But you can't go out there and say things like that about him or anyone. We have to stop that. That's not how we are only, like I said, we're only going to make it worse for one another. So moving on from Rush Limbaugh, let's be better people. Stop acting like assholes. Moving on from Rush Limbaugh, we have reparations are in the news. Joe Biden has called for a research committee to look into the possibility of reparations. I have a lot to say about this topic. Um, First and foremost, I'm not completely opposed to reparations. I think there's definitely room for discussion there. But I know what's going to happen with this discussion, and we need to be very mindful. Um, we are going to, a lot of people are going to immediately say, well, there just needs to be no question about it. Just, we need to just give them all the money, just give whatever amount of money that they believe is fair. No, there's a lot of subtlety and nuance to this situation. I do believe that some sort of reparation should be handed out, but how much? How do we get? What are the questions we need to ask? What needs to be considered? Here's one thing that needs to be considered. Um, do we give every African American person, every person um, of African descent, do we give every single person some money? Or do we just give those who are actually victims of slavery directly? Because, like, a lot of people have immigrated to the United States who are from parts of Africa where slavery never really affected that part of Africa. And they took, and these people came to America after segregation, after civil rights movement. So they weren't as affected by slavery. They may have been affected by racism. That's almost certainly true. And so are we paying for slavery or are we paying for racism? There's a little bit of a difference there. Um, are we going to make, or do we consider the fact that many African tribes took part in the slave trade and helped the Portuguese and the English round up slaves and to be sold, and that a lot of African leaders from that time benefited from slavery? That is a fact. It is a historical fact. You can go and find it for yourself. To what degree? There's a lot of debate. How many people were involved? Yeah, there's debate. But there were a sizable number of African tribes who were involved in the slave trade. Fact. So do we discount those people or do we call it a wash because, well, the Europeans raped Africa for decades, for a century or more? And so do we call it even with the Africans for their part in slave trade? Maybe so, maybe not. Do we, is it just the Americans that are going to pay reparations? Because a lot of people who were in America came here again after segregation, after the civil rights movement. A lot of these people are immigrants. Do we make them pay? Are they responsible? Um, some of these people from countries that had nothing to do with slavery probably didn't benefit from slavery. Well, in some ways, probably the whole world benefited from slavery. If you want to really get into it, if you want to really start picking it apart. But do we make the European countries chip in on this? Because England and Holland and the Dutch and Spain, they all greatly benefited from the slave trade. So do we make all of those countries chip in money, or do we make them pay separately from the United States citizens? How do we do this? I mean, there are people who were descendants who there are people whose families who've lived in America since the 1700s that their families never owned a single slave. They didn't own. So do we? How do we find them and discount them? They shouldn't have to pay. I mean, do we just say, well, they're white, so they benefited from it? I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be discussed here. It is a very complicated issue. It's much more complicated than a lot of people are going to pretend it is, and you can't just simplify it like that. This is a big, big issue. I think there needs to be something issue. Do we go with 40 acres and a mule as our starting point for what amount of money to give people? Math, the average value of 40 acres and a mule in the United States is about $18,000, give or take, depending on whose estimates you go by. So is $18,000 a number or is it less? Do we give let's say $18,000 is the magic number. Do we give $18,000 to every African American person in the country right, or do we come up with a number? For example, at the end of slavery, there were only 17 there were only about 6 million black people or Africans in the country. So there are about 6 million slaves, give or take. So is 6 million going to be our number? Do we multiply 18,000 by 6 million and then separate that up evenly amongst their descendants? How do we determine who's descendants and who's not descendants? I mean, it's a much more you have to address these issues. It is important because there are going to be people on both sides who call bullshit and probably have very legitimate arguments to some degree. And if we want to settle this issue, we have to get down deep, nitty gritty, and really settle this issue. So we got to get down to the bottom. We got to scrape the scum off the bottom of the pan. We got to get all of this. We got to handle it. If we're going to do it, we got to do it. You got to do it right. So that's my quick shot on reparations. Next up, H.R. 127, the gun control bill currently being floated around through Congress. This is a bad bill. This is a bad bill for everybody. It's a bad bill, especially for me, in my opinion, I think if you're an African American or any person of color and you believe that racism is a potential problem and a potential threat to you now and in the future, then you most definitely want to do everything you can to stop this bill. Because the reason for the Second Amendment, a lot of people don't like to talk about this, a lot of people don't like to say this, and especially right now after January 6th, this is a very dangerous opinion to have. But it's not an opinion because it is in fact what they were talking about. If you read all the history, if you read all their letters and writing, what they were talking about the Second Amendment was not just about personal protection or having the right to go and hunt for food. Which is something that I'm sure was considered and I'm sure is part of the Second Amendment. But the primary reason for the Second Amendment is because our founding fathers, for all their flaws, for all their slave-owning selves, they understood that somewhere down the road it was going to be entirely possible and probable, maybe even highly probable, that the government might turn against its citizens because the reason they revolted is because at one point, every single person who had come to America and settled was a loyal citizen of the United Kingdom. They were a loyal British citizen. They were loyal to King George and to various other kings that were alive during the settlement period of the United States. And they eventually realized that their government was turning against them and exploiting them. And I would dare say a lot of people in America right now feel that very same way. And our Second Amendment was put there so that we could be well armed enough, and we should also all be well trained enough. We should all be well armed enough that if we deemed it necessary, we could actually overthrow our own government. The Second Amendment is not there for home protection and hunting necessarily. It is there specifically so that we can overthrow our government. Because our founding fathers expected that it might be possible or might be necessary at some point. And depending on who you ask, some might say it's necessary now. I don't believe that. And if you do believe that, then you need to seriously stop and think about the consequences of that and really think about where we are. And so if you if you are concerned about the government, if you're concerned about yourself and your family and your freedom, then you need to be seriously concerned about this bill, because it not only like, because one of the key points of this bill is to restrict people with mental illnesses from getting guns or owning guns or having access to guns. But what they don't really spell out openly, it's in the bill, but what they don't spell out openly is that everyone in your house will be subject to a mental health check. And if anyone in your house is deemed dangerous, and to keep that in mind, the terminology and who is or is not dangerous is subject to debate and could be changed at any given moment. So if there's any dangerous people in your house, you have to turn in your guns or get those people out of your house. So if you have your brother living with you and they say, "Oh, your brother is his mental health check says he's dangerous," then you have to either get rid of your guns or get rid of your brother. Your kids, they can make you get rid of your kids or your guns, your wife or your guns. You know, anybody living in your house. Hell, they might even expand it and say, "Well, if there's a crazy person living within 5 miles of a gun owner, then that person has to turn in their gun." I mean, there's no telling how far they could go this. And everyone in this country should know. If you don't, then you have not been paying attention. It is very rare that we roll back laws. In fact, with things like this, we generally expand them. So when we start talking about restricting freedom of speech, restricting the Second Amendment, you have to take into account that down the road, that law is probably going to be expanded upon. And that means you're going to lose even more freedom. Freedom is the most precious thing we have. Freedom is such an amazing thing. And look, I know that some people don't get to experience it to the fullest extent that they should. None of us do, really, honestly. We all are restricted in our freedom in some way. Some for legitimate reasons that we should all just say, well, that's part of being in part of a civilized society. Because look, being part of a civilized society means you're going to agree to certain rules. That's what laws are. But the Second Amendment is there in case those rules start to get out of hand so that we can go and stop them. So H.R. 127 is a bad law. It is a bad bill. I'm not necessarily opposed to finding ways to keep bad people and people who are mentally unstable from getting a hold of guns, but this law and the way it's written is the way to go about it. It needs to be gotten rid of immediately. It needs to be dropped and kicked to the curb. And like I said, I say if you're a person of color, you need to be extremely suspicious of this bill. Because who's to say down the road, especially like I said, if America's half as racist as a lot of people think, they're not going to go, there's a lot of crime in the African American community. We're just going to go ahead and consider all African Americans a threat and take away all their guns. Just saying. Don't ever think that something like that isn't possible. So, guys, I'm going to get out of here. There's more I want to talk about this. I'm probably going to come back and expand on all of these subjects more in the future. But be safe. Stop hating one another. I don't agree with AOC on almost anything. There are some things I actually see eye to eye with her on. And in fact, I actually, in some ways, I applaud her on certain very specific things. But the anger and hatred that comes out of her mouth and her friends' mouths is just, that should not be allowed. Shouldn't happen. Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, all of those guys, and all of us, don't think for a second that they're separate from us. We've a lot of people have fooled themselves into thinking that they're not like us anymore. Oh yeah, they are. They're a lot more like us than we want to admit. That's where we are. We've got to stop being those people and start being the good people we say we want ourselves to be. And not just some of the time, all the time. So guys, I'm going to get out of here. Be careful. Have a good night. Try to be a better person. Stop being angry. Stop hating your fellow neighbor. Like I said, I've been guilty of it as much, if not more, than most people. But I'm trying to change my ways, and I'm trying. And as I do that, I'm also trying to help others see the light and change their ways too. So, guys, have a good night. Be careful. We'll see you next time. Look for more to come from Gray Matters. Our name may change. There's some copyright issues that we're looking at that have come up that may cause us to change our name. If nothing else, just for pure marketing reasons, because there's a lot of things that we have found that are going by the name Gray Matters. So Gray Matters isn't as open as we'd like to hope it was. So, guys, I'm out here. Have a good weekend. Be safe. Be careful. Go have some fun. Go see some local music. Go see some local comedians. Go see some local art. Do something and support local businesses. You know. So, guys, get out there and have fun. And I'll see you guys around. Have a good night.